welcome to Landscape Photography World, the podcast for everyone passionate about landscape photography. I'm Grant Swinburne and I'll be your host on this show, talking to landscape photographers about their motivations, likes and dislikes. This week, I'm talking to Craig McGowan about his motivations for getting into landscape photography, along with a range of other topics I hope you'll find interesting. Craig is based in Brisbane and looks to explore new and interesting locations as often as possible to capture nature's beauty. He's particularly passionate about being by the water, and many of his images reflect the emotions these visits provide. He loves to capture stunning sunrise and sunset images, long exposures, and scenes of moving water and clouds. We talk about how he got started in photography through his job and how it has become a place of serenity and release from the stresses of everyday life. We talk about how he draws inspiration from a range of sources and locations, the impact social media is having attracting people to locations, along with a whole lot more. I hope you enjoy the show. G'day, Craig. Welcome to the podcast. How are you going?
Good, thanks, Grant. Thanks for the invite.
Pleasure, mate. It's good to talk to you. I've been following your stuff for a bit and quite happy to have you on. Very pleased that you've said yes. Why don't we start with how you got started in photography? Where did Craig get into it and why?
All right then, a long time ago after the earth cooled. My first camera was as a teenager with my own money. I bought an Olympus OM1 manual SLR, and I was fascinated by the technology, but I also had a deep interest in photography. My dad used to take slide photos, and I just had that interest that I bubbled to the top, where I spent enough money and bought myself a camera. Yeah. I used to press the button very carefully because I knew each shot was going to cost me more money getting it developed and processed. I did that for a couple of years, I suppose, and around 18 or thereabouts, I got a license, could go to hotels, and there was the opposite sex. So that consumed a lot of my time, and slowly but surely, my Olympus slowly moved to the back of the shelf in the bedroom. But nevertheless, I really enjoyed the photography. The only thing I always remember to this day was the disconnect between me taking a photo and a few weeks or months' time getting those prints back. So what was there in the moment when I pressed the button wasn't necessarily there when I was looking at the prints.
There was no instant gratification back in those days.
None whatsoever, just a cost. But nevertheless, I think I learned a lot, and I was comfortable with where I was taking a photograph in regard to aperture, ISO, shutter speed. I'd learned enough to drive the camera how I thought I needed to drive it. So that was about it for my teenage years, and I didn't really touch cameras or any sort of photography again till I was in my mid-20s, and my then job required me to use a camera in some situations. Now, I wasn't a photographer. I wasn't employed as a photographer, but as a side to my job, I had to take photos. Yep. Again, it was still all film we were using, and we had to do the films, and we came back and we were taught how to use the darkroom. So we had to process our own negatives and do our own prints. Now, normally that wasn't the case, but nevertheless, went through quite an arduous process with the people in charge of the photographic area, learning more about photography. And it was then I realised that what I learned as a teenager was a good start, but I knew nothing. And so for a few years, I was taking a lot of photos, albeit, as I say, it wasn't my main job. We predominantly used 400 ISO black and white film or 1000 ISO black and white film. And away we went. And so it was good. I did that, as I say, for 3 years, and then I moved position within the organisation. And again, my camera and photography skills and interest and knowledge were basically parked. Yeah. Moved forward to maybe around a decade ago, I purchased my first DSLR. And I think, like lots of people, time's an issue. It was a hobby, but I thoroughly enjoyed it. I was fortunate enough at that stage. I was living in Western Australia in Perth, and I put myself into a couple of courses. They were run by Christian Fletcher, Tony Hewitt, and it was perhaps more of the artistic and the creativity side, albeit that the course also propped up Lightroom and Photoshop for people who hadn't seen it before, which I was one of those. And really, that was the start of where I am today. It really whetted my appetite. I thoroughly enjoyed both shooting and then coming home and seeing what I've got and having a play with that. Like a lot of people, I'm time poor, or certainly was more time poor then, and so it was only rare that I could get out with the camera. But as we move forward to 2021 and hopefully beyond, I'm getting a better balance and able to spend more time behind the camera shooting and whatever necessary, doing any processing subsequent to that.
Yeah, cool. So what is it about adventure and landscape and nature photography, I guess, that makes you get out there and do it?
I think initially it was out of the office. When I got back into photography around 2011, 2012, I was office bound, 4 walls, and that was my job. And to be able to get out when I wasn't working and just go anywhere, and Western Australia is absolutely stunningly beautiful. You don't have to go far to find somewhere pretty. Yeah. It was just a relief from that. But what I did find over time, that initially it was the escapism from the office, but that sort of diminished in time, and it was actually, I was looking forward to going out, taking photos in beautiful locations, and quite often not so beautiful locations. So it was exploring, going to new places I hadn't been to before, and without getting too far ahead, for anyone that's ever seen anything of my stuff, I do often repeat, go back to locations I've shot previously and shoot again, and I have no problem at all doing that. Sometimes I'm looking for better weather. Sometimes I just want to fix up the muck-ups I made the previous time. And thirdly, sometimes they're just great locations. I don't care which beach you're on at sunrise, it's a damn good start to the day for me. So I enjoy being down there with my camera.
Are there any particular spots that are your favourites that you just keep getting drawn back to?
When I was living in Western Australia, I used to go down to the southwest, down around the Margaret River region, and there's just some fantastic places down there. And the coastline's varying from quite sandy beaches to very rocky. You are predominantly facing west, but there are a few places that you can get different points of view, so you can actually get the sun rising over water in a couple of spots down there. So it's no trick of the shooter or the digital photography processing. The actual sun comes up over the water and away you go. So look, I've always liked down the Dunsborough Way and down that bottom tip down there. I'm now currently living in Brisbane, and I don't know whether I've got a favourite location, but I'm still drawn to the water, regardless of whether that's down the Gold Coast or some of the beaches around here in Moreton Bay, closer to the city, to get by the water and get the camera out and see what happens.
Yeah, cool. So what is it that motivates you creatively in terms of, when you're looking at a composition or looking for a composition? What are the things that get your motors running?
Besides trying to capture a moment, if it's a particularly stunning scene, I enjoy the challenge of, I thoroughly enjoy looking at other people's photography, and that's what I spend more time doing, I suppose, than anything else, is sitting at home at night, just scanning other people's photos, either their websites or social media. And I'm often in awe of some of the people and the results they get. Now, some are heavily processed. I accept that, and there's, whether you like that or you're not in that camp, some are, but others are quite, they could have been, or if they are processed, they're very difficult to tell, and they look like they're just out of the camera. So for me, I think I want to try and aim to get that sort of result in my photography. I'm certainly, I'd be the first person to say I'm not an artistic person per se. And an example I'd give you, Grant, many years ago, I was on a hike in Patagonia, and there was a group of people, or I was with a group of people, sorry, and this lady had bought a new camera system, which she was having trouble operating. And so quite often we found ourselves waiting for her as she got her camera set up and got the shot she wanted. I must admit, at the end of that hike and looking at her shots, I just wanted to delete all mine, whilst she might have she certainly wasn't mucking about because she wanted to, but her composition, her focal length, and she might have only been 20 metres or 50 metres down the path from me, but her shots were postcard shots. And like I say, I got back very despondent thinking, some of these are just straight out worth deleting. So I thought, and it was then I realised I have a lot to learn to get to a level that I want to be at. I think, whether people like my work or not, doesn't matter, but that's where I want to head.
Fair enough. I guess just talking about that, how do you feel, or how do you deal with that feeling of, comparing what somebody else has been able to achieve on a similar trip? I mean, I know I've stood next to other photographers and, they've come away with absolute bangers while I've come away with dross, or what I think is dross anyway. And I guess, one of the things that I try not to do is do that comparison, because everyone's at different levels. But how do you deal with that?
Look, it doesn't bother me. I don't necessarily compare apples to apples. So I'm trying to think, if I go to the Daintree rainforest, I'll take my photos of the Daintree rainforest, and whatever I get. Now, I've also looked at other people's photos, and it doesn't necessarily mean I've got to go and stand in that spot and take that shot. So perhaps all the good shots, I don't know, it's an argument there. Is there any new unique compositions to be made in iconic locations? I don't know. But I suppose the one thing that comes to mind from your question is, you go to a spot a few times and someone else goes there and gets a banger of a sunrise or something quite atmospheric, and you think, oh man, I was just out of luck. I can't jag that. So that's sort of disappointment, but that's nature. That doesn't bother me. It's just, well, good on you. You got a good shot, and I'll go back and see if I can get it better. So I don't see it as a competition per se. I just like looking at other people's photos and imagery and seeing some of the results they get. And I think, well, I'd like to achieve that. It might not even be in a similar location. It could be somewhere different.
Yeah. So are you looking for that unique angle or that unique composition when you're out trying to, work out where to stand the tripod or where to stand, and, or are you happy to, take, I mean, if let's say you're visiting Sydney, you take the Sydney Opera House. Well, there's the front on shot, there's the side on shot, and there's a couple of rear shots that you can kind of take. But beyond that, there's not many other angles where you can get to,
I'd possibly go to a place and try and scout it out myself and take a few shots, depending upon how much time I've got. Certainly, I know in far north Queensland, when the sunrise or sunset, you might get some stunning colours. They last for seconds. They don't last for long. Whereas if you're further away from the equator, you might have time to move around, if that's the sort of mood or atmosphere you're trying to achieve in an image. But I will move around, and I'm not backward in going as I'm leaving the scene, taking the shot that everyone else takes. So going to the point where it's the Instagram photo, and that's more just out of pardon me, that's just out of interest, and it's just a throwaway shot at the end, I suppose. But I don't see that as the hero shot of the day, nor was it the reason I went to that location to shoot the Sydney Harbour, was to get that iconic shot of the Harbour Bridge. If I can find a good angle, if I can find good light, well, fantastic.
Yeah, cool. I think that's a great attitude too, because otherwise you do end up either just repeating what everyone else has done, or you sometimes, and I know around Sydney, I've done it myself, you're trying to you're trying to look for that unique spot or that unique angle, and sometimes you nail it, sometimes you just don't get what you might be thinking of. That brings me, I guess, to the question around, do you go into the field with a concept in your mind about what it is that you're trying to capture, or are you rather going out reacting to both conditions and the landscape?
If I'm getting up early and going somewhere specific, I will have an idea in mind. I think from experience, just rocking up and thinking it's all going to fall into place, more often than not, it doesn't. So I'll do whatever research I need to do to satisfy myself that there's something there worth capturing, and what it is. Perhaps it could be as far out as I've got a little project I'm chipping away at the moment, but I need it to be winter. And for me, what I want to achieve is only in winter. So I've got a couple of locations pegged out, but now I need the winter or the climatic conditions to do their bit. And from past experience, sometimes I come home and I've got something really good that I'm happy with that I can further. And other times I got the shot I wanted, but it's just flat. Or the series of shots I've wanted, but I'm not happy with them. So whether I go back or just give up, it depends on the circumstance.
Sure. So you're heading out and scouting locations beforehand if you can, or are you relying on things like Google Maps or other tools to try and sort of nut out where to be?
A raft of things. It can be Google Maps. It could be just a photo I've seen somewhere, not even when I've been particularly searching. Someone has gone to one of the Tarkine Forest in Tasmania, whatever, and you think, wow, look at that. And that image, if it holds my eye long enough, it gets me thinking, well, what can I do?
Yeah.
Could I do something down there? And places where you've got to travel far, it's a bit hard. You can't just sort of go down and spend a week scouting about and then get set up and take your photos. Well, not most people can't. But I think because where I live, I can travel, within 100 or a couple of 100 Ks from here. I do return, and sometimes it's only after I've looked at my own shots I've realised actually that compositions I'm not happy with, the position I'm not happy with, and out of the series of shots, you might get enough information, or I get enough information to say, well, I can go back now, and now I know where I really need to be. I don't have a good eye just to walk up to a scene. I mean, I use my phone. I'll walk around taking shots with my phone and look at the screen and say, oh, yeah, that looks okay, or it doesn't, and then I'll either set up the tripod or keep moving about. But I don't think I'm proficient enough in that to trust my eye on the morning or the day. And so quite often I'll take a series of shots, and if I need to go back, well, I will when I can.
Yeah, okay. That's not a bad approach. I mean, I probably take a little bit more of a laissez-faire approach myself, but that's to each their own. Do you have a particular style or flavour or a specific feeling, I guess, that you're looking for, and how would you describe it?
I like nature, and I've historically liked the large panoramic landscape scenes.
Mm-hmm.
In more recent years, I think I have started to head towards the more intimate scenes with detail, and I'm slowly, I see myself when I look at a shoot, come back from a shoot and download, quite often I'll start off very wide, but then I'll change my composition totally. So I like the nature. I don't like over processing, although if you look at some of my city shots when I can't get out, I do whatever I need to do just to get them to sort of have a bit of bling. But my nature shots, I try to look pretty much leave as in camera. I certainly don't add or take things away. I might clean up the edges of an image, but I think the shots that bring me most enjoyment when I'm viewing is somewhere that you can look at a scene and you think, well, that just looks as you would expect to see it if you went there. It's a natural looking scene. It's not overcooked in the processing sense, and it's got enough detail and things happening that hold your eye. That it's not a quick glance and you move away. And I suppose it's not a landscape example I give, but I've really enjoyed looking at other people's photos of polar bears.
Yeah.
And most of them, I mean, people will say, well, I took this in Canada or I took this in the Arctic, whatever, and very true. But sometimes you can't tell, it could have been taken in the zoo. Yeah. But there's a Norwegian gent, and I can't think of his name off the top of my head, but he takes a lot of images of polar bears and they're silhouetted. So he's basically, I think, shooting into the light. Mm-hmm. And for me, every time I see one of those, I just stare at it. It really holds my eye. And I think, well, in that sort of sense, that's the type of shot I'd like to aspire to without copying him per se. And he's not the first person to do a silhouette shot of an animal, people or whatever. Sure. But I just a very artistic shot that holds your eye, but there's enough information there that you can work out what's happening and what's going on in the scene.
Yeah, well, I think that's what everyone's trying to aspire to in some ways, that they want somebody to sit there and look at it and appreciate it for what it is, and, I mean, I can't say I've achieved it too many times, but I know I've nailed a couple of shots.
The interesting thing I've noticed, Grant, is that my favourite shot will evolve over time. So what was my favourite shot when I come home might be different than if I go and look at it again in 6 months, 12 months time. Absolutely. But interestingly, everyone else has a different view. I've got my the family of critics that will give you give you advice and recommendations whether you're ready or not. And it's often interesting because what for me might be an image that's just okay, they really like, and they go back to, and they comment on it a couple of times. And I think, well, I'm missing something there. And Vicky Verka, my favourite one, everyone goes ho-hum and continues on. So it's a very subjective thing, very subjective.
Absolutely. How do you deal with the response that you get on social media in particular? I mean, everyone tends to get some level, well, certainly when you reach a certain level, you get some level of people saying, oh, that's not real, or, so forth. Have you got much of that, or, is that just something that you don't see?
No, I do get it. And the one that I've actually copped a fair bit of abuse, but I don't engage. I just let people think. I took a shot in the Mount Cook National Park, which I've only just recently posted a couple of months ago. Sure. And I'm taking a shot of the mountains and the Milky Way above the mountains. And there was fog and low-level cloud in there. And just as I'm taking the shot, a damn car comes out and illuminates the fog. And again, for me, it wasn't my takeaway for the night, because that wasn't what I was trying to shoot. Anyway, I've posted it and lots of people like it, but I've had so many comments that I've actually doctored that shot, and I've either, whatever I've done, but it's not real. And it was just one of those things. I didn't want the car. It was a quiet road. I didn't even think there was any cars down there. But all of a sudden, the headlights come on, and now it comes out of the fog, and that was the resulting shot. So, people will think what they think, and I don't think, even if I sent them a raw file, they'd still think what they think. I'm not going to waste any time trying to convince them otherwise. But having said that, some people have actually asked, and I went to the trouble of explaining online how it came about and what I did, because people are genuinely interested sometimes.
Yeah, no, definitely. Where do you sit with things like geotagging and talking about locations and so forth?
I used to do it religiously, but I've come to learn. I've benefited from it, clearly. I've looked at someone's stunning shot and where's this around in Sydney Harbour? I'm not from Sydney, I don't know. I want to go to that area and see what I can do. So, look, I have benefited from it, but I'm acutely aware it's doing a lot of damage in some circumstances. And especially where it's on private property, people are just saying, well, the original person who took the shot might have had permission from the farmer or whoever. but all of a sudden people just rocking up at all hours of day and night to get their version of it. There is some damage there. Yeah. So I'm a bit more careful now. If it's a car park at a public beach, well, that's fine. I'll do that. If it's not, I'll possibly just don't do it. I might say, well, it's in Brisbane or it's in whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I've sort of taken to a similar sort of thing. If it's an urban environment, I'm less worried about it because they're fairly well known. At least the ones I'm taking, they're fairly well known. Harbour Bridge, the city, it's not hard to find. But if it's in some of the more delicate areas, in national parks and so forth, I'm a lot more circumspect than I used to be.
Well, in 2019, I went to that. What is it? Helensville Tunnel.
Helensburgh, yeah.
Helensburgh, and evidently that got shut shortly thereafter. Now, I'm not sure if it was because of photographers or other reasons, but when I went there, man, there was a lot of people there.
Yeah, no, I've been there, and particularly when it does rain. I mean, the groundwater there is fairly polluted, which is not overly pleasant to walk through when it's raining in particular. But I think one of the main reasons why it got closed was because the glowworms that actually live in the tunnel were starting to noticeably suffer from the volume of traffic, and of course people using flash and lights in there. That basically what you're doing if you do that in a glowworm tunnel is you're interfering where they're feeding.
Yes,
they're in the dark. They're using that light to attract insects or whatever their food happens to be. So that's the main reason why that ended up getting shut. From that's at least my understanding of it. I don't know if it's reopened since or not, but it takes them some years to recover. I think too. The glowworms, they're a fairly delicate thing. I mean. Okay. In Sydney, I mean, everybody knows where the tunnel is. I think there's very few people that are, photographers that haven't been. I've been there myself, back before it was closed. But and those sorts of places, I think you have got to be a bit careful in terms of. I've seen some stunning shots there. I've seen some stunning shots with the glowworms. As part of it as well. But I think for me, having seen some locations get trashed, and that's something I was going to ask you as well. Have you seen some? Have you been to locations where there's been sort of damage from human trafficking?
I've seen rubbish, but again, whether it was actual photographers or just other people, I don't know. Off the top of my head, I can't think of anything particular I could say was a photographer per se, but clearly you get to a point where it is placed perhaps a ridge where you'd put your tripods and there's rubbish behind it. So other people have been there before me that have chosen not to take the stuff back to their car or whatever.
It's a shame that people are like that. It's never. I actually take a little, it's like a shopping bag, nylon shopping bag, which folds up small. I take one of those with me. I know I've used it on quite a few occasions. There was a waterfall up in the Central Coast, Giracool Falls. I was there, and in around the edge of the pool there was probably about half a dozen cans, from where somebody gone down and had a few drinks, and they'd left their cans of bourbon and Coke or whatever they were, mixers, beside the edge of the pool, and they were all empty. So it's a real thing, and it's a real problem, I think. And whether they were photographers or whether they were less serious photographers just there for an Instagram shot, or whether they were there just for a picnic or a drink or whatever, I don't know. It doesn't matter. If you're in a beautiful spot, don't mess it up.
Precisely. Yes.
Yeah. So, what's the most notable experience you've had while you're taking photos?
I think I went to Svalbard Archipelago back in 2018, and whilst I was there predominantly to shoot landscapes, which very fortunate to do, I did see the polar bears, and that was just I've never been a wildlife or an animal photographer. That's not a genre of photography that's actually interested me till then, and just was just amazing to see because they are inquisitive animals and they come to you. Like we're on a boat, so we're quite safe, but they want to come and see what's going on. They're an apex predator, so they're not terribly fearful of much. Although I do understand that they're not, humans aren't their preferred company, but nevertheless they come up to you. So that was interesting. But I think for me, I'm not sure. I've always struggled. If you ask me, you asked me about photography. I'm as much a traveller as I am a photographer. I've always loved travel. Yes, in the last decade, I've been taking photos. So to go somewhere I've not been before, and it could be just a national park in Australia somewhere, and there's plenty more I haven't yet seen, or could be somewhere overseas, to get somewhere and to have this experience. And it's not necessarily that you've seen photos from an iconic location. You just get there and immerse yourself. It's great. And sometimes if you're overseas, it's the food and the accommodation and everything that goes with it. I'm quite comfortable just getting a hire car and going with myself. I do go with friends, and I have gone on photographic tours. But sometimes it just, however the cards lay, I get a hire car and I drive myself wherever I am overseas, and that's what I do, and I'm very comfortable with that. But the thing, I think the takeaway, the most notable, is not necessarily the photograph. I've met some amazing people. I really have. Not that everyone wants to talk to you, and I certainly don't want to talk to everyone, but you might meet a few people and you keep in touch with a couple, and I've met some great people who are friends to this day through just standing out on an outcrop somewhere, taking a few photos and maybe seeing them a few hours later, and then catching up with them at the accommodation or at a bar, and before you know it, you've swapped details, and it just grows from there. So from that aspect, it wasn't a dimension I ever intended to try and mine, but it's happened that way, that I've got a great cadre of what I call new friends in the last decade that I would never have got if I hadn't have gone on some of these trips, both in Australia and the ones I've been fortunate enough to go overseas and do.
Sure. Well, that's great. So what's the furthest you've travelled to get a shot?
That's a good question. I'll have to think about that. I often, even here in Brisbane, I'll go a fair way west to take Milky Way shots. Now, I don't need to go terribly far, but getting an exciting foreground here is a bit of a challenge sometimes. I mean, you can get out of the city, so you get into some reasonable dark skies pretty quickly, because I do like Milky Way photography or night photography. But to get something in a decent foreground, you've got to go a bit further. So I can finish work and go a couple of 100 k's out, get some shots, and come a couple of 100 k's back, and be in bed not too late for the next day. So that's okay. But in the sense of overseas, I don't know, like something like I spoke about Fellblood, that's it's a long flights to get there. And a long, it's expensive. It's not a cheap thing to do. So
it's a bit of a hike.
I'll do that again in 6 months' time. That's not really not an option for me and for most. Yeah. So I've been to some stunning locations like that, but they're a long way away, and to buy extra memory cards is a lot cheaper than having to go back and shoot it again.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. So what's your favourite overseas location?
Look, I've always liked Iceland. I first went to Iceland around 2010, and I had a camera, but it was the camera was secondary. That was a touristy trip. Just got the hire car and drove around, and it is such a stunningly beautiful country and place. the only thing I would say is it's been its own worst enemy, because people from all around the world go there. And what I was fortunate enough to do in 2010 and drive into a car park and have a waterfall with maybe 20 or 30 people around, and a lot of them not even photographers necessarily. Now you go there and there's tour buses and lots of hire cars, and there's queues and places are fenced off, and it's changed. Now they've obviously done that out of having to do that, but I think for me, if it's not Australia, the best bang per buck is our neighbour, the South Island of New Zealand. Man, you can't, it's just stunning down there. It is just stunning, well, I think stunningly beautiful, and it has landscapes that we don't readily have here because of your 10,000-foot mountains that drop straight into the sounds or the fjords. It's just astonishing to the eye and great to capture on a camera.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, I'd go along with you there on New Zealand being great value for money, particularly for Australians. And I mean, pre-COVID, it was starting some areas in the South Island. I know in talking to some of the other photographers over there, they were starting to struggle with managing the volume of people running around, trying to get the Instagram shot or whatever. But post-COVID, it's going to be interesting to see how these places sort of deal with that, because in some places, I mean, Iceland certainly, when you were there, I'm quite sure you noticed there wasn't really the infrastructure to deal with vast numbers of people. Even in Reykjavik, the capital there.
Yes.
And I mean, it's interesting how much photography and social media has made a change to that tourist experience and the volume of people going to some of these locations. It's something.
The accessibility, I suppose, these days. Like, I mean, not that it was really on my radar, but going overseas as a young bloke wasn't an option. But I think for a lot of people now, it's not a huge cost. For some people, they just can't afford it, but it's an achievable or reachable cost if you want to do it. And but just to finish off on your question, I've not been everywhere in Australia, as I said, and I don't want to start an online war, but for me, Karajini National Park in Western Australia is the best place in Australia I've been. It's just another world. It's I've been there. I went there when I was living in Perth, living in Western Australia, but I want to go back again, because the gorges there are beautiful, just stunningly beautiful pieces of nature.
Absolutely, yeah. No, it's one place I still haven't managed to get to. I've done a bit of the Kimberley and sort of Northern Territory, but still haven't managed to get to Karajini or Shark Bay is another one on my list, and I got a very, very long list.
Yeah, well, I think as fast as I'm ticking locations off, the list's just growing faster than I can cut it down.
I was talking to my wife actually earlier today, where she hasn't seen her parents in the UK for since before lockdown. I think it was 2018. Anyway, so we're sort of planning our next trip over there, and where do we want to go, and where do we want to take the in-laws and so forth, and it's an interesting experience sitting there and saying, oh well, I could do a side trip up to the Orkneys or to Faroes or
well, the Scottish Highlands do offer a lot, so
I know.
You're in the right part of the country,
or Wales, or we want to stay on the mainland. So we're sort of planning that next trip and trying to work out what we include, what we drop off, and how long we're gonna have to hang around there. But certainly,
we're blessed, and but we also have that tyranny of distance here.
Absolutely, yeah.
I went up to Longreach and drove out to Winton and beyond, and coming back that night, it was just nothing. Like you drive a couple of 100 k's and you don't pass a thing. Now, in the UK, I don't think you go a couple of 100 metres at any time of day or night, and you have oncoming traffic or whatever. So, it's hard to get to for us, but man, there's just nothing out there to get in their way when we're out there.
Absolutely, yeah. It's one of the things I like about getting out into the bush in Australia is the remoteness of it, and the fact that you can, as you said, you can drive for hours and not pass another car, or be passed by another car.
Yes.
Yeah. So when you, I guess, looking at your processing. Sorry, I'll start that again. When you're looking at your processing workflow, you'd say you'd want to try to keep things natural as possible. So does that mean a minimal touch to your processing, or do you, what sort of things are you actually focusing on?
I'll answer that in two parts, I suppose, Grant. And my first comment would be don't follow what I do, but I bring everything into Lightroom, and I use Lightroom as my catalogue and my storage repository, for a want of a better term. And most, I'd say 90% of my images that I would post or put out are just done on Lightroom, and 10% where I've got a particular trouble, I've got some banding or something's happened that shouldn't have happened, I'll go over to Photoshop. But so that's the first part. But to go back to your main point there, I've historically done mainly global adjustments, cleaned up things, got rid of dust spots, adjusted perhaps the contrast in a particular area. Sometimes adjusted the colours. When I say that, either adding saturation or decreasing saturation. Sure. Just small fixes. As I say, if it's a beach and it's a beautiful sandy beach, but just on the bottom corner there's a couple of rocks, I might take the rocks out. But small pebbles, or shells. But I don't sort of wholesale change it. Most of, I'd say 99% of my photos, I wait, if there's people around, I wait till they move. So if it's a beach shot or whatever, I'm not a big people person in my photography. And
I haven't met too many landscape photographers who are.
But most people would thank me for that if they see what I'd do if I took a photo of them. But I notice there's quite a lot of photos on the internet of landscapes with somebody just to give it scale. And I must admit, sometimes that's really good when you're looking at a scene that's a bit hard to work out. Am I looking just 10 metres ahead, or am I looking 1,000 metres ahead? Yeah. Have a person that might be way out of close range, but it just gives you some scale to the scene and context. So it does work, but historically I don't have people, so I don't have to do any of that sort of work. Look, I don't really do a lot. I think in more recent times, I'm trying to selectively have adjust contrast in a particular thing. So I'm trying to think of something, if it's a natural scene, a dirt road and got trees either side, I might try and bring out the contrast a bit in the trees and a bit of colour. I might look at, just softening the road a little bit. Just to try and, where do I want to look at the scene, and what would I like other people to do? Now, I'm still experimenting. I wouldn't say I'm any good at it, but I try that, and sometimes I just can it and start again. Other times I think actually that's okay. The one thing I learned long ago for me is if I do anything, to sit on it, and I usually sit on it, can be for 1 month, 3 months or more, and coming back with fresh eyes is the best thing. Like I say, I'll either just reset everything and start again, or sometimes I think, actually, there's something there I can work with. I suppose, again, I'm just going on from looking at other photos where you might want to emphasise the foreground. If it's something in the water, that you want to bring out, and the horizon and everything that's on the horizon is less interesting. Well, flatten that out, lower the contrast, lower the colours, and see if it works. Sometimes it looks okay, sometimes it doesn't look okay. So each image, as I keep finding out, is different and unique. And the other thing I'm just getting into now, this what I call late on, is getting into printing. And I must say that has quite dramatically changed my post-processing. And it's even gotten me now starting to think, when I take a photo, how would that look in print? What's it going to do? And how what am I trying to say here or represent? And it's I'm going through a huge learning curve at the moment with the printing, but that is, I think, in turn, helping me with my post-processing.
Yeah, I think that's something a lot of landscape photographers go through when they do start either printing for themselves or printing for friends and family or printing for sale, is that what works necessarily on a screen and what you might like to look at on a screen doesn't necessarily hang that well on the wall, and sometimes vice versa too.
Well, I found out pretty much how you explained it there. I was fortunate that I've had people approach me wanting to buy a couple of images. Now, very small in total quantity, that's for sure. But I went to sending the prints off to a professional printers, and they were giving me back exactly what I'd asked for, and they weren't good. Now, it wasn't the print companies, it was just my preparing the file to print. It was just lacking. It wasn't ready. And perhaps sometimes my choice of media, print media, and a few other things, the prints came back and I wasn't 100% satisfied. And I think now I'm much better versed to say whether I print in-house or if it's a large print and I have to send it out, I know what I want, and I know if I'm happy with the result or not.
Yeah, I'm definitely an advocate for talking and communicating clearly what it is that you're trying to get out from your printer. If you can strike up a good relationship with your printer, it goes a hell of a long way to making your prints look good, because they can give you some advice on things that you can do before they get hold of the file. I mean, they may or may not, depending on who you go with. If you chuck it up on what's it called, Snapfish or one of them, you're going to get whatever you've processed it. So they don't take a look at it and they don't make any adjustments to it. Some other people will do that for you, though.
Well, fortunately, the ones close by here in where I live in Brisbane, they're quite good. That you can give them instructions, and quite often, if you want quite a large print, they might say, "Well, it's a $10 or $15 extra." But what I've found is, if I can get the print right on my machine with the paper I want, and they use that paper, I can also just fling them a hard copy of the print. This is how it looks when I do it, and it might be shortcutting. I don't know what you want to call it, but you get the result you want. This is how I want it to look, and that's what I get back.
Have you got any tips for people that are prepping an image for printing, to the things they need to look out for?
Well, the first thing that I notice when I compare preparing an image to put on Instagram or even on my web page versus printing, the amount of dust spots I miss. Now, that's possible. That might be just me, but I was astounded that where you've got a bit of linear space that's not sort of much detail, if there's a dust spot that jumps out. Look, I'd still say I'm very much in the learning phase, but things like if you're printing on a matte paper, you've really got to bring the darks down. You might have to increase the saturation. You may have to readjust your sharpening. But again, I think it's very much a personal taste, because each image is different, and the amount of detail you might like in your shadows when you process the shot and what I might like could be two totally different things, and there's not a right or wrong. It's just a personal choice. But I have found that some some images look better on matte paper. Some might be a bit better on what I call a pearl or whatever you might want to classify it as, but something with a little bit of sheen. And the preparation for both those types of media is different. It's the results you get if you send the same file to the two different print media, they come out quite different. So you certainly need to practice and be prepared, I suppose, to burn some paper in the process to get it just right, because I'm not skilled enough to be able to adjust it on the screen in a soft proof and it come out perfect. Maybe the expert printers can, but I've got a long way to go yet.
Yeah, I certainly admire those photographers that do print their own work and know how to manipulate both the print process as well as the pre-processing for that. I know, when I've printed sort of some larger format, particularly on acrylic, so it's like a metallic paper backing onto an acrylic front piece. I spend a lot more time on the, that pre-processing and, possibly brightening up some of the midtones and some of the upper ends of the shadows, but darkening down, as you say, some of the bottom end of the shadows as well.
Yes,
it's really a trying to get that mid-tone contrast balance right is particularly the larger you print, obviously, the more noticeable those sorts of things are going to be. So.
And the other thing which it's caused me to do, which is a bit of a first world problem, is that I run two files in Lightroom, a print version and what you call a screen version, because they're just too far. The adjustments are too far apart.
Your print file looks rubbish on the screen.
Precisely. Yeah, and Vicky Verka.
That's right. Yeah. No, I've learnt that lesson a couple of times. Sent the wrong file. They've come back and said, "Are you sure that's the one?" And I'm pretty sure. Hang on a sec. Oh no, not that one. And it can be an easy mistake to make.
Yes.
Have you ever had a problem with photographer's block or hit a creative wall, and how did you handle it?
I have. Sometimes I'll go for a period where I just don't even get the camera out. Sometimes it's just the busyness of the day, work, whatever, life getting in the way, and so the camera sits there for months on end and doesn't really see the light of day. Other times, I can go out to a place and I've got absolutely no idea what I'm going to shoot. I don't, and I think for me, what works for me is instead of pushing myself too far, I'll still get the camera out and take shots. I'm better off just to have an easy session and come back and go when I'm in the right frame of mind. I know a couple of mates who actually get out there and they'll just knuckle down and go the hard yards, but it doesn't seem to deliver for me the images I would want. So I'm better off to use it more of a scouting mission, have a look, get a few sample shots and whatever, and go back when I'm feeling energized or have that, don't have that the blockages or whatever you want to call them.
Yeah, no, fair enough. What do you do, I guess, when you hit that wall and you're sort of sitting there saying, okay, well, do you go and do something else, or?
Quite often, well, in recent times, because I've been getting into printing, if I've gone out for a shoot and that hasn't worked, I've got so many images on my system that I'd like to print, and I might not be interested in going out today to take a photo, but I'm still interested in learning more about printing. So I might just come home and spend whatever time at home, doing something I want to do. I'll watch a lot of videos, listen to podcasts about printing, and I'm going to do a course in the middle of the year on printing. So I'm I'm a bit of a sponge for information. So I find that if I'm flat in the camera sense, I just come back to home and come into the little room and turn on the printer and start experimenting there, and that's sort of before I know it, the day's over.
Very cool. Yeah, that's it's not a bad idea. It's not something that I've played around with a lot actually, but it might look into that as an exercise next time I'm sort of not feeling the photography bug quite as much.
Well, part of me is thanks to COVID. Well, not that I had it, but because of the lockdowns, I ended up getting a website up and running, and I was surprised at the interest. I don't, but barring, I think I've got a link on my Instagram site, and it's obviously connected to Google like everyone else's websites are. I don't really promote myself at all, but I've been surprised over the last sort of 18 months the amount of inquiries I get now. 99% of them don't mean anything, but every so often something comes through. Someone says, well, I would be interested in getting a print of this. And then I look at the file that looks brilliant on screen, and when I print it, it's a dog's breakfast. And I think I can't send that. And then I go into a mad meltdown while I'm trying to work out how I'm going to resuscitate this dead image. It looks great on screen and someone's interested in, but it looks just appalling when I print it. So there's a bit of rationale or reason besides. I do get enjoyment from learning to print, but there is also a reason behind that, is because well, if I'm going to say to people, if you're interested, contact me and I'll sell you something if you're that interested. I need to be able to follow through and do it properly and do it professionally. That I'm proud to say, well, I'm happy with that, and I hope you, are too. I hope you appreciate it.
Yeah, definitely. What's your favourite thing and least favourite thing about being a photographer?
My favourite thing is getting outdoors. That's a country mile from everything else. Just getting out in nature and be with a couple of mates, or be by myself here or anywhere in the world. The thing I don't like the most, I think, is when I need to go somewhere and I think, actually, I need two of us because we've got to go down this ravine and I can't find anyone. And I make a decision: do I go by myself or don't I? And it's just a safety thing, really. I don't mind bad weather. That doesn't bother me, because I think if I look through my catalogue of work, I've possibly got more shots I'm happy with in crappy weather than I have on a bright blue sky or
more opportunities for interesting light, I've found.
Much more. So it means I've got to get up early, because although I'm a morning person anyway, so sunrises often suit me better than sunsets, just from a timing perspective. And
good thing you moved to the East Coast then.
And also there's less people around at sunrise. In Brisbane here, if you get a stunning sunset, man, every man and his dog's out. Rightly so, but trying to get somewhere to perch your tripods near impossible in some locations. So the sunrise here, we don't have daylight saving, so in the middle of summer you've got to get up a bit after 3 a.m. And so that's not so much fun, even though I'm a morning person. Getting up at 10 past 3, 3:15, and so I can drive to wherever I need to be for before blue hour starts. Oh man, it makes the day drag on. Once I'm home.
I know exactly what you mean. I'm an hour from the nearest beach, and I do a lot of beach photography. So it's okay. I should move closer, but.
Well, I grew up by the water. As kids, we lived by the water, so that's just what I'm used to. And I think till the day I die, I'm not near the water right now. I'm near the Brisbane River, which is, for anyone who doesn't know, Brisbane City is about 30 minutes from the coast. So we're an inland city. Well, inland is in 30 minutes drive. But living by the water, there's just something magical about it. It's like explaining to someone who hasn't got a dog, you come home from work and the dog's happy to see you. You live by the water and it's just a great place to be.
Absolutely. So what tips have you got for someone just starting out in landscape photography?
I think do your own thing. certainly look at other people and find photos you like, but just take your own photos and take lots of them and just practice and practice and practice. Work out what works for you, what doesn't work for you. And if you find something you like, a genre you like, be it black and white, be it minimalist, be it macro, whatever it might be, just have fun doing it. I've never been a professional photographer where it's meant it's my wage, so I haven't had those pressures. And I imagine that's like any other job. It's hard yakka because at the end of the day, it's all about the dollar. For me, it's a hobby and an interest, albeit I still think my photography is at a level that is professional, but that is not my full-time job.
Yeah.
So I think just to get to the level you're at now, some of my mates who aren't photographers take fantastic phones with their Samsung and their Apple camera phones. They take great photos. And when you look on that little screen, it's as good as my whatever $5,000 Nikon is. Yeah. And they're happy with that. So that's great. So, yeah, just get out and shoot and don't be worried about the technology. Find the camera that you can afford. That's going to be, what's the best camera, the one you've got with you, but don't get caught up in the technology. Yes, there might be some advantages into having bigger gear, but now I've got a backpack with my body, my lenses, and I'm carting a lot of weight. And again, for some of the shots, if they're only someone looking at it on Instagram, whether I've taken it with my Nikon DSLR or took it with my little mobile phone, no one would know. I don't think most people would know or care for that.
Or care for that matter, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I just think get out and do it and practice and immerse yourself in the aspects of photography that you like. And if you want to learn, there's so much to learn online and by just bumping into people, other photographers. Most photographers are happy to share. They'll say, oh, I'm using an ND filter. What's that? Oh, I'll tell you. The other thing I would I would suggest, if people are really getting into photography, look at some workshops. Now, it's a cost. But do your due diligence on the workshops you go into. There's I don't know everyone who offers photography workshops, but I'm guessing there's a full spectrum like everyone else, from genuine, passionate, professional people that will do everything through those that just want your money and will run. But find someone who you think might be good. Ask about, look for online reviews, because what I have found from my experience is I've learned a lot from the facilitator, but I've learned just as much from the other participants. And it might be just another participant asking a question that I had never even thought of, but that was my takeaway from the whole thing. That question and the answer was actually, that was the big thing from it. So if you want to grow and learn, don't be backward in signing up to a workshop, be it a half-day session that might be a city walk, or it could be a tour overseas that's with like-minded people. Just do your due diligence first to see what you're in for and the pricing and everything else. But certainly it served me well. I don't do it often, but I'm not backward in saying I'm still learning, and I haven't done one since COVID, obviously, but I would have done one, up until the end of up until COVID came, so 2018 or 2019, and thoroughly enjoyed it. Enjoyed the learning experience. Enjoyed the other people, and learned a lot.
Yeah, absolutely, great advice. I think. Thank you. So are there any particular photographers that are catching your eye at the moment and that I should be talking to on the podcast?
I'll have to have a think about that. You said that was something of interest, and right off the top of my head, I don't have any names that jump out at me, and that's a shame because there's just so many people I follow on Instagram that I think take great photos for me that I really enjoy. Some are professional, and some I don't think are full-time photographers. Sorry, some are full-time photographers, some aren't full-time photographers. That's perhaps a better way. But I'll have to have a think, and maybe I can send a list or put some names down, and you can attach it to somehow get it across, because I immerse myself regularly on not maybe a daily basis, but certainly on a weekly basis, looking at other people's imagery. But I think also the thing that, as I'm speaking, comes to mind, sometimes these people are geographically based. So we spoke about the Faroe Islands, and now I said the Scottish Highlands. Some of the photographers up there, I love the scenes of those windswept beaches and the grass reeds and whatever is happening in the sky and the sea. And that sort of thing I find very pleasing to my eye. So I suppose I naturally gravitate to that sort of photography and those photographers. Again, some do it better than others, in my opinion, but that sort of stuff I do enjoy.
Yeah, totally agree. All right, mate. I've got one more question for you, and it's possibly the most important one. Do you like pineapple on pizza?
Sorry, could you say that again?
Do you like pineapple on pizza?
Yes. My first pizza ever was a Hawaiian. So I grew up in Melbourne, full of Italians and Italian pizzas, and my first pizza was a Hawaiian pizza as a young teenager, and I loved it.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. Well, thanks very much for taking the time, Craig. It's been fantastic learning a bit more about you and how you do what you do. Where can people find your work?
Thank you, Grant, for the opportunity today. If anyone's interested looking at my work, I'm on Instagram, CMAC6248. And I've also got my own website, which is CraigMcGowanPhotography.com.
Thanks a lot.
A typing thing, but if you put in the search engine, it will pop up.
Brilliant. All right. Thanks again for listening to Landscape Photography World. I hope you enjoyed the show, and keep listening, because I'll be joined by some great guests in upcoming episodes. You can find my work in this podcast at grantswinburnphotography.com. I'm also on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, as well as YouTube. I'm Grant Swinburne. Hope to see you out shooting soon.